Well, welcome everyone to today's program. I'm Nancy Mitchell, standing in for David Brown, class of 77, who was unable to be with us today. Let me give you just a little groundwork for today's program. We will see a short film that was produced by Rick Stevenson. And then Rick and Alan Goya, class of 77, will have a conversation, a Q&A for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. And I do want to remind everyone, this program is being recorded and will be posted on our alumni virtual webpage in about a week after we're finished. So with that, I will show the film. Rick, is there anything that you would like to say in advance of the film? Or just roll with it?
Yes, this was the beginning of a feature film that I made, my first feature film made on the 5,000 Days Project, which is something that we'll talk about. And it involved a personal and I used my son Oliver as the little me. So that's what you'll see in the first 2 minutes of this.
When I was a little boy, we'd spend summers up at my grandparents' cabin in Idaho. Some nights I would sneak out, sit on the dock, and ponder the great questions of our time. Is the moon really made of cheese? If you connect the stars like dots, will it reveal the doorway to heaven? This particular night, I remember wondering why the path of moonlight followed me wherever I went. It was a great scientific puzzle. But suddenly, all at once, like the apple landing on Sir Isaac Newton's head, the answer came to me. It was so obvious. I had to be the center of the universe. Unfortunately for me, not everyone got the memo. When I became a filmmaker, I decided maybe I could make that happen for other kids, though. And hence the 5,000 Days Project was born. Over the last 10 years, I have followed over 100 kids, capturing their feelings about themselves and their world. And now, over a decade later, the 5,000 Days Project has expanded to include thousands of kids from 12 countries over 6 continents. Ever look back and say, I wish I'd invested in that 10 years ago? It makes you wonder what that very opportunity might be today that'll make you a genius 10 years from now. Imagine 10 years from now having an expertly made personal documentary time capsule of your child growing up, answering key life questions once a year as they reach maturity. Imagine gifting your child with a personalized This Is Me short film for graduation that they can use for college, scholarship, or job applications. Imagine providing an in-depth annual check-in for your child with the most trusted and experienced team of personal story mentors available today, with a 20-year history of success. With brain science revealing that the key to our higher IQ is a well-developed EQ. Imagine having given your child the unique ability to connect the dots of their lives, the ability to answer the greatest mystery they'll ever face. Who in the world am I? Enter StoryQ's 5,000 Days Project, which has democratized the doc, making personal, longitudinal documentaries. Check it out at the 5000daysproject.org.
Wow. Well, I guess it's mine. Is it my turn? Hi, this is Alan Goya, and I'm here in, do you hear me, Nancy? Am I coming through?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm here in Boulder City, Nevada with our guest, Rick Stevenson, who's in Vancouver, British Columbia, right? Rick,
Indeed.
is that where you're?
Indeed.
Indeed. Cool. But anyway, this was this project started, these interview projects started, it is, what is it, Nancy? National Humanities and Arts Month, something like this. And we're going to celebrate, why become an artist? What I was thinking the question of, how do artists tell, artists as storytellers, how important are they as storytellers? And then I'm learning about you, and that's all you do is listen to stories, Rick. So tell me, so let's start from the beginning. So, you know, this is what you've been doing, but let's start from the beginning. Let's have that first picture of Rick. Let's, you know, how you got to Whitman.
It's coming.
Look at that. Oh, it's coming. All right. This is it. This is the Rick I know. You know, it's like, you know, actually you are, you know, well photographed in my 1975 Wailapu, but, you know, a struggling student. But, you know, I always thought like you were like the kind of an ideal guy, you know, like next picture here. Here's a picture of us together here next. Okay. Notice you're about a foot taller now, you know, and, you know, Rick was so cool. I mean, it was, you know, I thought, I must have had a crush on Rick. I mean, anybody else had a crush on Rick out there, you know, but, you know, he was perfect. I mean, he was a nice guy. He, and you listen to his biography, you know, he was well-adjusted. His parents loved him. He likes his brother, you know, and everything's perfect. But you go on this journey and, you know, you become the storyteller, but first of all, tell me how you got to Whitman and that story, you know, how'd you get to Whitman and where did you go from there?
I just want to point out this shark tooth necklace.
The shark tooth necklace, right? Yeah.
It's where I came up with that or why I wore it, I have no idea. But there it is, and you captured it for all eternity.
Yeah. You know, I thought it was like, kind of, you know, like the joke was, you know, if you're a minority, I mean, it's white man college, and you were like my ideal white man, except you had an edge to you because you had these sharp teeth, yeah. You know, so I was bonded you from being in Hawaii. I go, okay, this guy, you know, he's like, you know, has that edge to him. But, you know, that's one of the things.
When I went diving to get the teeth for that necklace, I only took a few of the shark's teeth. I left him some as well.
Oh,
so
so this is a humane extraction that you had to. Yeah, that is really cool. You know, I mean, at this point, when I'm taking this picture here, though, you are the coordinator of Cordner Hall, right? You brought in shows and exhibits and things.
I was the concert coordinator. Yes, I was responsible for bringing Bill Cosby on campus.
Well, that's right. And that amazing mural, that was an art major. What was the guy's name that painted that mural?
Oh,
does anybody remember?
Greg Hickman.
Greg Hickman. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, wonderful guy. One of my best friends. Yeah, he laid that paper out into the gym and sketched it out and did a remarkable job.
Right.
How did I get to Whitman? I came to Whitman. It's strange the reason we do things. I went to Whitman because Tom Martin went to Whitman, and Tom was in the class of 1974, and Tom had been student body president of our high school in Seattle, and I copied everything Tom did.
Really? Okay.
My sister's class. I thought he was the coolest guy around, and so I ran for student body president, and I went to Whitman, and he was just there for a year when I was there. I never knew him very well, and then sadly, I think he took his life shortly after Whitman. But that is the reason I originally went there, because I was because of Tom Martin. That was the only reason. And I thought, well, it's got to be a good place if Tom's going there.
All right. Yeah. So how did you get involved in, you know, producing these shows? I mean, how did you get coordinator? Like, you know, this is a crowd shot we took. Does anybody know that person that's screaming there? Is that a Woody there? Anyway, that looks familiar. Anybody recognize any of those faces or hands in there? I've always wondered who that was.
I don't know them, but I think I wanted to serve in student government, but I just didn't want to do the student body thing again, and so I thought concert coordinator would be fun, and we brought MX Blue and I think Tower of Power, and it was a really rewarding experience. And of course, we had no idea who Bill Cosby was at that time. He was America's dad, and you know, it's amazing how time reveals things.
Right.
Yeah, it was a privilege to be able to bring people to Walla Walla to Cordner Hall, which was one of the most acoustically perfect halls in the world.
Right. No, it was it's a great place, and it's a great venue. I'm assuming that they're still doing things like that. Why was a student kind of running that program at the time? You know, just because nobody else would else to do it.
No, it was actually an appointed position, I believe. I don't know if it still is, Nancy, but yeah. But I do remember that we had a dean of students called Whitney Ellis, and Whitney kept trying to influence me to bring Glenn Yarborough and the Yardbirds or something, which I didn't think would probably be a big hit with the students, so we never did. But there was some administrative encouragement there, but it was largely student run, and we turned a good profit. The Bill Cosby was hugely successful. We did 2 shows.
Mm-hmm. And so you graduated from Whitman with a degree in history, right? And then where did you go from there?
That's correct. I got a scholarship to Oxford University, but it was a year later. And so I had a year to fill. And so I decided to take my interest in international relations and go to the London School of Economics for my master's. So I went there for the next year, and then went on to Oxford University the following year to start my doctorate.
Right. And what was your doctorate in?
Well, it's officially a doctorate of philosophy, but I didn't take any philosophy, nor do I know any philosophy. But I was I was able to study history and international relations, and my initial goal was to go into the State Department like David Brown did, but I'm not as smart as David Brown. So, but luckily I never had to be turned down because I never took the test, because I got dissuaded. The year was 1979. I got dissuaded by the hostage crisis in Iran, and I realized that the nature of serving in the Foreign Service had changed from previous years when you actually could make some decisions. Now with the communication systems the way we're, everything was operated out of Washington, and you kind of basically went to parties, which wasn't of great interest to me. So I started looking for something new that I was interested in while I was writing my book. At Oxford University, you just write a book. That's all you do. And it's I think it was, it took me about 3 years to do. So
you got the big, and then but you got this degree, but you became a filmmaker. What was that leap like?
Okay, so how that came about was, the great thing, as I said, about doing the degree at Oxford was you just write a book. So you just meet with your supervisor and you go to the library. And as a result, I had a great deal of time, spare time, and I became an oarsman and developed rowing, and did that for several years while I was there. And I also started going to a lot of movies. And that is when and where I caught the film bug. And anybody's ever caught a bug of any kind that is attached to a passion, you can't do anything else. And so I got a bunch of wealthy friends together and put on a drinks party, and asked them if they'd all invest in a film. I'd never made a film before. That night there was £10,000 pledged, which was about $13,000. The next morning, half of it was canceled when people sobered up. But we had the first half of the money, and then my head of sort of provost of my college had been the head of the BBC, and so he made some calls for us. The BBC put in the rest of the money, and so we got a bunch of students together. We made this incredibly pretentious love story
Really?
privileged. I mean,
What was the story? I mean, what was the story that you were so passionate about producing and got the bug for?
well, that's just it. It wasn't a passion for the story. It was an ambition. And that's the interesting thing about Oxford is I think somebody once said it's characterized by way too much ambition chasing too little ego gratification.
Uh-huh.
So, but there was a ton of talent, a lot of which, like Hugh Grant, was in the film. Hugh was a friend and a student, and a lot of the people that are in the British film industry now were involved in that film, and they would have probably not gone into the film business had it not been for that film. Because when I went to make the film, Oxford had no film society. They had viewed film as being too nouveau for study. So I was this sort of American that said, well, let's start a film society. And now that's going very strong.
So does Hugh Grant thank you for his film career?
I think Hugh has thanked me far too little. And, you know,
I think so.
Next time I see him, I'm going to say that. Yeah, let him know.
That's right. I mean, and then you met this guy. Who's that guy? I mean, you're even taller than that guy is, man.
Yes. Yeah, Bob. Well, this was the beginning of the Sundance Institute, which for those who don't know is a independent filmmakers cooperative that Redford started at Sundance, his home and resort. And it was early on, and somebody gave him the script of our next story, which was written by my partner, Michael Hoffman. And he really liked the script and he invited us, and it was the beginning of a relationship where I produced 3 films that he executive produced.
And what kind of stories were you telling at this point? What kind of stories were you telling? What were you trying to tell the world?
There was the 3 we did with him was Promised Land with Meg Ryan and Kiefer Sutherland, and that was really a story about an event that had happened in my partner's small town in Idaho, a tragic event that sort of captured the dark side of Reagan America. The next film was called Some Girls, or in Europe it was called Sisters. It starred Patrick Dempsey, McDreamy, and Jennifer Connelly.
Yeah.
And it was a story about a young boy who goes to stay with his girlfriend and her family in Montreal over break, only to have her break up say, I'm glad you came. Now I know for sure I want to break up with you. And he's stuck in this snowbound mansion with this very strange family. To me, it's one of the best films we've made. It's called Some Girls. We did it with MGM. And Redford executive produced that. And the third one we never made, it was called The Book of Bed, based on a book by Frederick Buechner.
So, but these were films that you were trying to make commercially viable then, right? I mean, some kind of, that was the idea, right? That these would be hits, and right. So you go to LA, and I mean, you're doing these films, but something happens, right? And all of a sudden, there's a change, and you decide you need to get back home. That you haven't married. Well, we forgot to tell you, one of your ambitions was to marry Jackie Onassis, right? I mean, you didn't get to marry Jackie Kennedy.
I was 7 when that was.
You were 7. Oh yeah, it was your.
That's probably worth noting.
Yeah.
But I had a lot of crushes when I was 7.
Right.
But it's interesting. Yeah, what brought me back home to Seattle was that I didn't like myself very much in LA. It's not that I did anything particularly wrong or illegal or anything like that. That's not me, but I just didn't like the business that much. I loved making films. But it led me much more in an independent direction. And so I've made most of my films, all my feature films, my television outside of LA. And I'm not making a blanket judgment. There's some wonderful people there working in the industry. It just wasn't good for me. I started,
Right.
looking at cars and wanting cars and all this sort of stuff. I just knew that wasn't healthy for me. So moving back to my home in Seattle was very helpful on that front. But I also had had a hard time finding the person that I wanted to marry. And I had been privileged to have a lot of great relationships. And in the end, I realized it was my issue. It wasn't anybody else's. But once I started work on that issue and found the person that I fell in love with, who I'm married to, Julie, I decided I wanted to protect that and stay at home in Seattle as possible. And that's, so I created a project called the 5,000 Days Project, which I could do at Seattle, which would involve interviewing kids once a year as they grew up. I stole the idea from the 7-Up series, but I wanted to do that the BBC made, but I wanted to do something much more profound, much deeper. And so I went into a local school. They got very interested in it. They said, can we recommend some kids? I said, yes. They recommended 800. I interviewed all of them and we ended up with our first 60. And the first interview was in December 2001. The second was was in February 2001. The second was in December 2001. And what happened in between was 9/11. And I suddenly realized the kids needed and wanted to talk on a much, much deeper level. And so at that time, the 5,000 Days Project, which is basically the time it takes to go through school, took an about face and became less about documentaries, even though we still make them, and much more about helping kids use their own stories to discover themselves and find their place in the world. And that became my life's work. I still direct movies, still do things like, make films, but that's my primary work. And I now interview kids across the world every year.
But this experience, I mean, I get a sense from, the path of your career that this changes you. I mean, these stories become your stories. You make a statement, you say that you believe we can learn no more important skill than storytelling because it is the foundation of all human communication. Now, to me, that's a very profound move from this future filmmaker. And all of a sudden, you're listening to these incredible stories from these adolescents, and there's something that's happening there. What is happening here?
Well, I do believe that we own nothing more important than our own stories. I mean, we can be rich or buy stuff or whatever, but none of that stuff in the end matters as much as our own stories. And so learning to tell the most difficult story you'll ever tell, which is your own, enables you to learn to tell any story. And I would argue that especially kids and adults, that there's no more important skill because it is the basis of all human communication and connection. Just watch a speaker. A speaker is speaking in front of a group of people. They're talking theory or anything programmatic, whatever people, hopefully are listening. But the minute he or she starts to tell a story, everybody leans in. And it has such relevance to us. I mean, I'll tell you a story. Tell you a story about a guy who, an Aboriginal gentleman, uneducated, in Southeast Asia, December 26, 2004. He's standing on the shoreline, holding his spear, and he notices that the birds are behaving in a strange way. And he notices that the water has an interesting movement to it. And he notices that the monkeys are climbing the cliffs. And he knows from stories that have been passed on for centuries that the tsunami is about to hit. And he was able to come back and get his entire village to high ground, unlike lots and lots of people that died in that tsunami. So we tell stories first and foremost for survival. But also stories help us on a whole bunch of levels. Like if you think of a kid if you think of all of our work is look at Nancy's work. That's constantly about stories. Look at anybody that is an artist that's always telling the story. So look at teachers, look at salesmen, look at people in government. Everything we do is communicate. Even mathematicians, like the number 386 really doesn't mean anything without a story attached to it.
All right. Do our stories change?
365 means something because there's a story attached to the number of days in a year. 366 only gets its glory once every 4 years. So, numbers, even math is pretty senseless unless the story is attached to it.
Right.
So that's why I believe stories are so valuable. I'm sorry, Alan, what did you ask?
No. Do our stories change? Do they evolve? I mean, is stories just not so much fact, but is it realization? I mean, do you find different things, as stories develop? Let's say these kids, as you go through do their stories change a little bit, or as they see themselves clearer, or they listen to their past stories, as it changed their future stories?
Well, one of the aims of the 5,000 Days Project is, if you think about it, there's two types of people in the world. There's victims, people whom life happens to, and there's people that write their own stories. So when you ask, do they change, that largely depends on whether you view yourself as the main character in your story or whether you're a secondary character in someone else's. And when I was a little boy, my favorite book was Harold and the Purple Crayon. And in that book, Harold was this little cartoon boy who was in bed one night and looks out the window and he sees this beautiful moon and he wants to go on an adventure, but he doesn't know where to go. So he takes his purple crayon and he draws a road and he rocks down the road, but then his hand starts to shake and he falls into this ocean, but he can't swim. So he draws a boat and he climbs in the boat, but the boat won't go anywhere. So he draws a sail and it sails him back to shore where he's hungry. So he does a bunch of pies and eats a pie, but then can't finish them all. So he creates an animal to help eat the pies, but then he gets scared of the animal. I mean, the basic story of Harold and the Purple Crayon is of a boy that knows he holds within his own hands the power of his own story. And I find that so beautiful and profound, and is the basis of of an outlook or a mindset of successful people, that they are writing their own story every day, every moment, every decision, every step. They're writing their own story.
Right. Has this and so what is your current projects right now? What are you doing? You're still doing the 5,000 days, but you also have Prodigy Camp and you have the senior, it was the Human Library Initiative. Tell us about those projects.
Sure. Well, maybe we should talk about the senior one first, because it ties to the Human Library Initiative. I was asked about 5 years ago, 15 years into the 5,000 Days Project, what my ambition for it was. And I said, well, I'd like every kid in the world to tell his or her story. His, her, or them. And, but my ambition's grown. I started interviewing a lot more people, especially people in our age range and up. And I discovered that there's so many beautiful stories that were being lost. And if you think about it, 99.9% of our stories go to the grave with us.
Right.
And if stories are indeed about passing on human wisdom, it's not like we're a smart species that can afford that drain of 99.9% of our wisdom. And so Human Library Initiative is all about starting a collection of organizations, from schools to companies to governments, that collect their stories. There's a beautiful African expression that says, when an old person dies, a library burns down. My goal of the Human Library Initiative is to just start getting people to capture their stories. And Nancy, I wonder if we do want to play the Senior Legacy one. Maybe you can send a link out to watch it. It's a 5-minute sampler and it's well worth watching. It's really quite beautiful. So,
but you know, I look at your pieces of film and with the children, for the people, but the things that are people are telling us about themselves are so deep, and you know, and how they're affecting, you know, how do these things affect you personally? I mean, does that become part of your story and make you a better storyteller? You know, just listening how honest these people are with their stories.
I don't think there's any greater privilege than having somebody tell you their story.
Right.
So I'm really in a constant state of gratitude in these
Right.
interviews. And you know, they did this famous Harvard study where the question was, what brings happiness? It was started, I think, in 1924. JFK was a part of it, and they interviewed people decade after decade of what brings happiness. And they always come up with the same conclusion. It's not money, it's not position, it's not even education. It's human connection.
Right.
And when my father, who was a very prestigious and successful, nationally renowned man, was dying of cancer about 10 years ago, he gave me the greatest gift a dad could ever give his son. He gave me the gift of letting me know what was significant. In the end, none of his accomplishments mattered. It was just his relationships. There's this great, I think it's New Yorker campaign of a guy in his dying hospital bed hooked up to all these tubes, and the line is, I wish I would have bought more stuff. You know, the point being that being able to get on a deep level with somebody and talk about, you know, their ambitions and fears, gives you the ultimate sense of connection. So I
say that line, Rick. Say that line once when you kind of we missed that last line.
Oh,
repeat. Yeah.
What did I say? I just think I was saying, I think that having the opportunity to talk to someone, have them share their struggles, their dreams, their ambitions, their fears, leads to the ultimate sense of connection with somebody. And I feel very grateful to be a part of that with kids and well, people of all ages that are engaged in telling their stories.
Well, with that, Rick, you know, thank you for connecting with me. And it's a real privilege to be able to reach out to you and, you know, the other artists and the other artists in the series. But, you know, at that point, why don't we open it up to the group here, and let's just have a reunion here and see who's here and see if there's any questions, you know. And we'll start with, you know, with a question, how would you say, after all of this time, how did Whitman influence your life?
How did Whitman influence my life?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of lifelong relationships. I think mostly Whitman, well, I would say 3 things: lifelong relationships. I learned to write at Whitman, which is a key part of telling stories. And that came through our fairly rigorous history department, because there's so much writing involved. And the third thing, I think I gained a great sense of social responsibility for my privilege at Whitman, because we were privileged. And we lived in a bubble, and I think probably still do, which is probably what college should be.
Right.
But it's so interesting how many of our classmates went out to save the world, and I'm so proud of that. I'm honored to be part of that.
All right. Great. Well, let's see who else is here. Who else is here? Anybody have a question for Rick or a comment?
I have a question.
remember-
This is Carol. Hey, Rick. So
Thank you.
first of all, I loved Harold and the Purple Crayon also when I was a kid, but I probably didn't take such a deep, for me, the message was I can't draw. It's just very shallow and limited. My father was an artist, and I used to read that book and think, oh God, if I could draw like my daddy. But anyway, I love the conclusion that you drew from it.
Oh,
But my question actually, you said you had a concept that in life we're either the victim or the protagonist in our story. I just wonder, especially as you've gone out into the world, is that a very Western American view, or do you find that in other cultures?
I find it across the board. And it's a mindset. And I see people that feel victimized, disempowered, frustrated, and are easy to pick up into political movements, quite frankly, and are people that feel like they've been left behind. And then it's not cultural at all. I've had people who've been handed the world on a platter, inherited huge amounts of money, feel like they're victims. And yet you also can meet somebody in Chile who lives with a dirt floor, who's super empowered about what they're going to do and what they can do. And I don't know exactly what it is. I don't know
Right.
why some people are one way and why are others, but
Well,
it's true.
is there a relationship between your story and what you believe, your beliefs?
Oh, definitely.
And what, okay.
I mean, I think that we all live on a continuum between what we long for and what we're afraid of. Our ambitions and our fears, and where we live on that continuum definitely creates our point of view. Like if we see the world in cynically,
You're fading out
negatively,
right
we
here.
probably live
Okay.
closer to our.
Right.
I was just saying, we live closer to our fears, we'll see the world pessimistically. And if we live closer to our love, our longings, see the world in abundance, see the universe as a generous, compassionate place, we tend to view the world more optimistically. But there can be those people in the same family. At some point, I think it's tied to your level of sensitivity, how much the world impacts you. And I'll give you an example of that. There's a thing called a music equalizer that many of you may know about. It's in studios, and it's a whole range of buttons that cover from the low frequencies to the high frequencies. And when they produce a final piece of music, they often will compress so it doesn't break the glasses in your house and doesn't bust the speakers. It compresses it into a safe zone. And my experience in interviewing kids is that as the slings and arrows of life are thrown at you, you tend to shrink your emotions into a safer zone where you can live. And the advantage of doing that is it's a safe zone for you to live in. The bad side of it is you don't hear the full beauty of the music. And all of us have to make that decision, the extent to which we're going to be sensitive to the world. There's this great phrase that a cynic is really just an idealist with one too many disappointments. I mean, I've absolutely found that to be true. So I just think it has to do with your outlook and your experience of life and your level of sensitivity.
Do we have any other questions out there, Nancy or Jennifer? We are the only ones left, Rick. Are we?
Oh, we have one more joining us right now.
Carol, I will tell you a drawing story.
Oh, yes, please.
I have no ability to draw either. And when I wrote the first screenplay that I was going to direct for studio, it was a children's story about a lake monster named Orky. And we cast the film, and Mark Harmon was cast in the lead, who's on NCIS now. And Mark invited me to his house. He lived with Pam, married Pam Dauber, who was Mindy in Mork and Mindy. And they invited me to stay at their house to work on the script. So I was at the house working with Mark, and his then 6-year-old son, Sean, comes in the room and is really fascinated by our discussion about the lake monster. And he says, well, can you draw, what does Orky look like? And I said, well, he's kind of like a manatee. It's kind of like this, I hadn't fully envisioned him yet, but Sean says, well, what's a manatee? Can you draw it? And he hands me a napkin with a pen. And suddenly I'm like, oh my gosh. So I try to draw out what Orky looks like. I hand it to Sean, and you can tell on his face, like, what the hell is this? And I found out later that Mark, who I ended up having a very good relationship with, but he called his agent that night and said, are you sure this guy can direct? He can't even draw. So.
So what is your special power, Rick? What is your superpower? I mean, do you have a special superpower that you think that is stronger? Your strongest thing that you do. What do you think is that magic power you have there?
I think I would say that I'd say 2 or 3 things. The fundamental superpower that I see in common in the kids that I interview that end up doing well. Mm-hmm. That I know that eventually feel happy. There's one common denominator, which I think is a superpower they all have, and that is never having to doubt that they were loved. I never had one moment in my life where I didn't know I was loved. My parents made that incredibly clear, and I see that. I see the impact of it on kids. And I see the dearth of it because I interview orphans and the whole range. Mm-hmm. So the first superpower has absolutely nothing to do with me. It had to do with my parents gave.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a power.
Yeah.
Power of love. Yeah.
Then you just don't have to worry about anything. You're
right.
You're not hungry your whole life. In fact, they did this famous study with the I think it's 800 Canadian orphans that came from the Balkans when they're having those troubles in the 1990s. And they followed them, and they found that the kids up to 8 months, and they found these kids in orphanages, diapers hadn't been changed for 3 weeks. I mean, nobody being touched or held or anything like this. And they found that up to 8 months, kids who were taken in up to 8 months lived normal lives. And kids after 8 months had tons of troubles, spending their life trying to fulfill that hole of love, a lack of love. That's a very powerful study. I would say if I have any other superpower, it's just that I am curious and like to listen.
Right.
I think I'm somebody once said, "Oh, you're a teen whisperer," and I hated that expression because that suggests somehow there's some manipulation or anything like this. I do think I can get kids to talk, but I get kids to talk because I'm a listener. And
Right.
all of us who have related to kids know that the secret with kids is just to give them the respect they deserve.
Right.
We
Well,
have a
I think-
question. Ted Duncan has a question, Ted.
Hi there. Rick, thanks so much for doing this. I've been racking my brain over the years trying to figure out if we actually met at Whitman. I don't even remember. But,
I'm not sure either. Your name's familiar to me.
it's
I remember you, Ted.
There was such a small school, and like of the people on this call, I know two of them pretty well, and Scott Lawley chimed in momentarily. But anyway, so I've been a journalist for part of my life, and now I work in a company doing more internal sort of corporate stuff. But you know, what you were saying about interviewing and all certainly rings very true with the things that I've done. Now, I was just wondering if you'd talk a little bit more about how you have gone about sort of preparing for interviews, you know, how much time you take with the people, and sort of how you choose your subjects, because you know, if you come in with at least a rough idea of the questions that you want to ask, it makes a huge difference. And I was just wondering if you could talk about your process a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I don't really do the interview you did as a journalist. To me, there's two standard types of interviews. There's the job interview, where you're going in to impress, or as the interviewer, try to find out whether this person's qualified to work for you. And then there's a journalistic interview, which is sort of the great dramatic, prestigious, you know, Frost, Nixon sort of thing.
Kind of like we're doing right now, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
These hard-hitting questions. Why did you bring Bill Cosby? You know, that sort of thing. But what I think the process I discovered is, I hope this doesn't sound arrogant to say, but I feel like it's a whole new approach to interviewing, and it's got a name. It's called the story cue method. And it's not an out to impress you or be impressed thing. It's asking key life questions that have to do with your dreams, ambitions, fears, struggles, to help the individual. The interview is dedicated to the individual and helping them discover themselves through their own story. And so a classic example of an interview for me will be, you know, asking some of the obvious questions off the front, where they're from, and, you know, where they're raised and what their dream was growing up. But then I'll start to get into family and have them talk about each member of the family, sometimes defining them with one word. Then we get into questions about how they define themselves with one words, and what do you think their strengths are, or what do you think their weaknesses are. And then I'll run through the range of emotions, like what makes them happy, sad, angry. I sometimes, I'll tell you this. This is a really wonderful story. I was staying with one of my relatives in Salt Lake City, and they had a 9-year-old boy named Andy. And Andy's older brother's sister had been 5,000 Days kids, and he said, "Uncle Rick, can I be a 5,000 Days kid?" And I said, "Sure, yeah, let me set up the camera, I'll interview you." So I did that. I sat him down. He had a big woolly cap on, huge eyes, and he's kind of staring at me like this. And I said, "Andy, you ready?" He nods, and he immediately bursts into tears. And I said, "Andy, I haven't even asked you a question yet." He goes, I know, but I know what you're going to ask me." And I said, "Oh yeah, what's that?" He said, "You're going to ask me, when's the last time I cried and why?" I said, "Well, that's normally question 7. but it sounds like you know the answer to that. And he nods, and I wait. And he starts to tell me a story about something that happened in his school, but he can't get through the story. He just breaks down crying again. And I said, Andy, I really want to hear this story. I'll just hit her, and when you're ready, try again. So he tries again, doesn't get through it the second time. Finally, the third time, he gets all the way through the story. And basically what happened was he'd gotten a part in the school play, and the teacher had asked him to stand up in his classroom, sing his solo. And he did that. The kids laughed at him. He burst into tears and ran out of the classroom. The sort of thing that would, put you in therapy as to why you can't speak in front of a Rotary Club, when you're 42. And so just for stupid filmmaker reasons, I said, Andy, tell me the story one more time, just so I can get it loud and clear, because there was a lot of crying, sniffling through it. So he tells it a fourth time and does it pretty well, best yet. Then I get this idea. I said, Andy, do you trust me? And he goes, of course. And I said, okay, just do me this favor. Tell me the story one last time. But this time I want you to sing it. And he looks at me really strange and goes, I was in my class and the teacher asked me to, and he's singing this story, and he immediately bursts out in laughter. And I saw in the space of 6 minutes, something that had been so dark and ugly and almost cancerous that he couldn't even get out of his mouth. I saw him vomit it up, hold it in his hand, expose it to the healing light of day, and laugh at it. And that's when I realized the power of the verbal journaling interview. And I later found out the brain science behind that. And that is that all of our emotions are sourced in our amygdala. And when you are asked to talk about them, talk about what you're feeling, by necessity, they have to move from the amygdala, where you have no control over them, to the prefrontal cortex, where your language and reasoning skills are. And so, Ted, I saw, especially in this incident, and I've seen so many times since, the interview actually not only as a means of self-discovery, but as a means of healing. And of course, that's the basis of cognitive therapy, right there. So it was, so as I go through my interviews, just to finish answering your question, I do get into, their point of view of the world, their fears, their longings, sometimes the most difficult things that happen to them. I ask them for their 3 wishes. And I do have a set of questions, which I just did 2 interviews at noon and 1 today, with 9 and an 11-year-old. And then I just let kind of it take me wherever it needs to go. So it's kind of a new, I don't even know what to call it, Ted, other than it's sort of the ambition is to help the individual discover themselves through their story. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think for myself, when I've felt the best about an interview, it was a matter of, sort of touching something in that person that made them really want to talk, and maybe about something they'd never talked about before.
Yeah.
And, it's, I've worked with a lot of brilliant people, and just, I remember one time I covered an accident with our public transportation system, and there was a reporter there from another news organization, and he, this is before everyone was tweeting everything and videoing everything and so forth, but he got right up next to, pretend this glass is the person. He got right up next to him and just looked them right in the eye and asked all his questions. He was just so engaged with that person. This is someone who had witnessed the accident. And it just really stuck with me that if you make that connection, it makes such a huge difference. I mean, I think I'd done that, but it sort of amplified what I was doing.
What's like one of the more sensitive interviews you did? Like where you feel like you touched that person?
So there's a professor at a local college who had written a study about men who were caregivers, which, if you know anything about the world, you know, is kind of a rarity, because women tend to be the caregivers. And so I thought this was a really interesting study, and something that should get more attention to encourage more men to take on that responsibility in their families. And after calling around to different places, I eventually found this guy who was living in South Philadelphia, and his wife had Alzheimer's. And I set up the interview. I went with a photographer, thought I'd be there, you know, an hour, because that's usually what interviews would last. And I think the photographer and I were there for 4 hours. And I mean, he really, really wanted to talk about why he was doing it. And the story I turned in, this was for Associated Press, you know, it was supposed to be somewhere around 700, maybe 1,000 words. I think by the time I was through, it was more like 2,500. But, you know, so that was definitely one where I felt like I really kind of broke through all the veneers.
And look,
Was it that?
You know, I've got a, Rick, while you and Ted are talking, I want to talk about a superpower, because you both tell stories, but you know, Ted does an interview and then turns it into a story. But I think one of the superpowers that you have is that, you know, you do an interview in such a way that it becomes a story. And that, I think, is really interesting, because, you know, how many times have one of us had we're telling a story. I mean, this happens to me a lot. I'll be telling a story. I happen to be able to tell a fun story, you know, and people will say, oh my God, you have got to write your life story. I mean, when are you going to write your story? And so it kind of stops me, because I think, well, I can tell a good story, but I can't have trouble writing a story. I've been interviewed before, and someone can write an interesting little snippet, a little article, but what you do is on film, it's kind of what Ted asked you. You've created a series of questions, and then sometimes off the cuff, like you described with the kid with the you know, singing, you know, you're writing the story through the questions, and then improvising as it goes. And that, to me, that's a superpower. So,
well, thank you. You know, what I do know is that each of us has an arc. Every moment of our life, we're working on something that we're struggling with, and approaching it, well, like a movie, because I am filming while this is happening, and there's a big camera right there, and you know, your goal is to make them forget about that camera and just let them open up. But I think the functional aspect of these interviews for people, and it's not just kids, it's whoever you interview, it's help them identify the arc that they're currently doing. Now, every main character in a movie has an arc. Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, starts out thinking that her salvation's somewhere over the rainbow. In the end, she discovers that she had everything she needed, all along. Jean Valjean and Les Mis, starts out as a hardened criminal, and ends up having to receive grace and then eventually give grace. And you can go through, the Titanic, Star Wars, you can go through every main character in a movie has this arc that starts in their old world, that then they confront a great fear. They find every excuse not to confront it and finally have to go in their cave and just, it's the classic Joseph Campbell thing. And I think helping people find their arc is such a honor, because they will give you little clues with things that they say, like a simple question. Like, I remember interviewing this 16-year-old, and I said, what's your name? And then I said, do you have a nickname? And he said, yeah, Moose. And I could tell something was wrong there. I said, what do you think of that nickname? And he goes, I don't know, it's just what people call me. I said, no, what do you think of that name? Well, how do you feel about it? He said, I hate it. And I said, why? He said, because I've always been big for my age and it hasn't been used in the most complimentary way. And so almost any question will have clues as to, so there's a boy that needed to come to terms with, the way others viewed him and his view of himself. And it's such a privilege to help people like discover the clues in themselves. They are. Alan talked about the Prodigy Camp, which is something I run for young filmmakers and songwriters. And the center of the camp is a campfire where kids come tasked talking about the most difficult thing they've ever faced. And this one kid from Northern California, 14 years old, had the worst year of his life. His father had lost his job. His parents were getting divorced. They were losing their house. He started to make some bad decisions. He was getting in trouble. I mean, there's just one bad thing after another. And he was laying it all out. And he said, it's so bad that I don't even want to get out of bed in the morning, which is pretty much the classic definition of depression. And I turned to the group and I said, okay, let's see how we can help. What's his art? Because he needs to know where he wants to end up if he's going to get there. He had no clue what his art was. And we'd found out about other portions of his life that had gone very well. It's just this one difficult year. And so somebody raised their hand and said, well, maybe he needs to slow down his life. Another person raised their hand, so maybe he needs to make smarter decisions. And people threw in this. Then there was this little kid, the youngest kid in the camp, maybe the brightest, 12 years old. His name is Diego. He's a rap artist, dreads. Sits there and he goes, well, doesn't he just need to discover the beauty of the unexpected and the possibilities of the unknown? And like, that's his arc. He needs to see that in the things that he's, it's not discovering what your struggle is, but it's also like, what's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? And to help people, we can all help people do that if we just ask them the right questions. We may not have the right answers, but the right questions will lead to the right answers.
I think if anybody's interested in Rick's work, on Audible, there's a tell me about the 21 things you forgot about being a kid. That piece is great because it's a story. It's a story about your art. It's great. It has your kids, but it tells the story. And I think what's interesting about it is how your story changes, how the pain of these children become part of your pain, and how you grow with that and be able to see things and be able to listen to the things that kids say that are so simple and true that we forget as adults, and we kind of ignore and try to make it too complicated, maybe, but I would suggest anybody interested in this subject, it's an Audible, I believe, 21 Things You Forgot About Being a Kid. It's really worth the time listening to. Nancy, I don't know how much, go ahead.
Sorry, good. I was just going to
I
say
know how much-
that.
Say that again. I missed that last comment, Rick, sorry.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that you've mentioned twice now the impact the interviews have on me, and I do want to own up to that, because I think that the title is sort of inspired by the fact that kids in high school are told the same thing we were told, and that is enjoy your high school years, the best of your life. I mean, all of us were told that. And I don't know what your response was, but I remember mine. Mine was, what? This is it? This is as good as it gets? Really? This is what I have to look forward to? But from the adult point of view, we have the rose-colored glasses and think of all the, and our music equalizer has shut down the things that were painful and given us just the great memories. I mean, I had a great Whitman experience, but I know I had a lot of pain at Whitman. I know I went through some dark periods of wondering who I was and questioning some of my own thoughts. And I mean, that's what makes the experience so educational and such a struggle and so beautiful. And it's the struggle. And so what I was referring to in the book is that we all take these bullets, these slings and arrows, I'll say bullets growing up. And they create arrested development in us. And when you have a chance to really have discussions with kids, it just opens up all those things like, oh my gosh, I remember that. And it kind of allows you to get out, to start to review that arrested development about what you feel about intimacy or what you feel about anger or any variety of, or betrayal, loyalty, all sorts of things. And it gives you an opportunity to have another shot at it. So I feel like the luckiest person alive that I've been able to do this. And my wife said, you come back changed every interview. You come back having grown in some way or whatever. And I suddenly thought, oh my gosh, do I have thousands of kids around the world helping me work out my issues? And I think the answer to that's yes. And I'm okay with that.
With that, I think we should end. I mean, this is great, Rick. Unless there's anybody with other questions, and I know Nancy probably wants to go home. It's probably snowing in Walla Walla or something, right?
Oh,
Nancy, you there?
This is fabulous.
Okay. But it is. I want to talk to Rick. I mean, there's lots of things I love to talk about. I mean, Rick cries at least once a week. I know this summer I cried a couple times, and it was the most releasing. That's a whole nother subject, and maybe we can talk about it next time. But I think this is really enjoyable, Rick, and thank you everybody for joining us, and share it with your friends.
Thank you, everybody who showed up. Thank you. It's really kind.
Thank you both. It's been a privilege and an honor. It's been fascinating. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Well,
this was really, really great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
And nice to see everybody.
Thanks, Ted.
Great to see everybody.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
See you next week.
See you
next week.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, next week should be fun. We have Nancy Lucas, and so
Yeah.
it should be a fun one. Okay.
Thanks, Ellen, for doing
Good
that.
night.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Everybody be
Bye-bye.
safe.